She thought it was just a ride home, but the man behind the wheel was a billionaire with a shattered heart. What began as a simple mistake would uncover secrets, awaken a past he buried, and test the kind of love money could never buy. And when she learns the truth, will she stay or walk away forever? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The rain hit the pavement in hard, rhythmic bursts as Mara clutched her fraying denim jacket tighter around her. The neon cafe sign behind her flickered one last time before going dark. Closing time. Her feet ached, her hair stuck to her cheeks, and the cheap phone in her trembling hands buzzed low with a notification. Ride? She squinted down the dim street, her shoes soaked through, squelched with every small shift of weight. Another late shift done, another pocket full of tips barely enough to stretch between rent and her mother's medicine. Mara had no room left for mistakes tonight, not when she was already on the edge. A sleek black car glided to a stop in front of her. Her heart leapt. Finally. She dashed through the rain, yanked the back door open, and slid in, shaking and breathless. "I'm so sorry I kept you waiting," she mumbled, wiping raindrops from her face. "My shift ran late and my phone, well, it's always dying on me. Thank you." "Excuse me," came a voice from the front, deep, clipped, and laced with annoyance. "Do you think I'm your driver?" Mara froze. She looked up. The man behind the wheel wasn't wearing a uniform or the polite indifference of a rideshare driver. No app badge on the dashboard, no soft-spoken welcome. Just sharp features, a jawline carved in stone, and eyes that flicked toward her in the rearview mirror. "Oh my God," she whispered, her stomach dropping. "You're not... This isn't..." "No," he said flatly, putting the car into park. "It isn't." Panic rose in her throat. I'm sorry, I thought this was... My app said a black sedan and... Oh God, I'm so sorry." She reached for the door handle, but it didn't open. "Child lock. Unlock it," he muttered, and with a soft click, the door gave. He was halfway out, mortified beyond words, when his voice came again, this time quieter. "Where were you headed?" She paused, her soaked sneakers planted on the curb. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Summit Street, off 8th, Rosewood Apartments." A beat of silence. Then, to her utter disbelief, he leaned forward and slowly pulled the car back into drive. "Get back in," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I'll take you." "I can't let you." She hesitated, heart hammering, but something in his tone wasn't unkind, just firm, final. Wordlessly, Mara got back in. The city passed in silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic click of the wipers and the occasional hiss of tires over wet asphalt. She didn't dare speak. But she felt his presence in every inch of the car, the tailored coat draped over the passenger seat, the scent of cedar and something expensive, the tension in his shoulders that seemed carved from years of isolation. She glanced at him once. His profile was strong, the angles sharp, like someone who never flinched, never broke. The kind of man who probably owned buildings she cleaned. "Rough night?" he asked, eyes still on the road. She blinked. Yeah, long shift. I waitress at Cafe Luna on 6th. A pause. "You work late often." She gave a soft, tired laugh. "Always. Rent doesn't care how tired you are." He didn't smile, but something in his jaw loosened. "And yet you were polite, even to a stranger in the wrong car." She furrowed her brow. "My mama always said, kindness doesn't cost a thing, but sometimes it saves your soul." Another long silence followed, but this one didn't feel heavy, it felt thoughtful. When the car finally pulled up in front of the crumbling brick building she called home, Mara turned to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know I messed up, but thank you for not making it worse." He looked at her then, really looked at her. Raindrops streaked the windows, casting lines like tears over her reflection. "Be careful, Mara," he said, voice low. She flinched. "How do you know my name?" His eyes lingered. "It was on your name tag." She looked down. Café Luna. Mara in bold blue. "Right. Of course." She gave a nervous laugh. "Right. That makes sense." She reached for the handle again. "Mara?" She turned. He didn't say anything for a moment, just studied her. Then, finally, "Not everyone gets into the wrong car and walks away the same." She blinked at him. "Is that a warning?" "I thought," he murmured. With that, she stepped out into the rain. The black car waited a moment longer, engine idling. Inside, Alan Drake watched her disappear up the crumbling steps of her building. Watched the light flick on in her small apartment window. Then, slowly, he drove off, his reflection flickering in the rearview mirror like a ghost. By the time Mara closed her apartment door behind her, the silence inside was deafening. A single bulb flickered above the chipped kitchen tiles, casting shadows across the cramped studio. The smell of damp carpet and reheated soup lingered in the air. Her mother's soft breathing came from behind a thin curtain that separated the sleeping area from the rest of the apartment. Mara slipped off her soaked shoes and crept toward the old heater in the corner, flicking it on with a practiced jab. It rattled awake, groaning with age, but offered a flicker of warmth. She peeled off her jacket and sank into the tattered love seat, heart still racing from the strange ride. Not a driver, a stranger. And not just any stranger. Alan Drake. She hadn't recognized him in the moment, but now she was sure. She'd seen his face before, on news clips, tech magazines, billboards promoting some corporate summit. He was the CEO of Drake Innovations, one of the youngest in the industry, reclusive, brilliant, a man known more for vanishing from the public eye than attending his own product launches. And he'd driven her home in silence. She leaned her head back and let out a breath. What just happened? Across the city, Alan sat in his car beneath a steel awning at his penthouse parking entrance, engine still running. He hadn't meant to stop. When he saw her running toward his car, soaked, apologetic, frantic, his first instinct had been to wave her off. But something about her had frozen him. The kindness in her voice, the way she spoke like the world didn't owe her anything, even when it gave her nothing. She reminded him of something long buried, a life he barely remembered, a time before money changed everything. He should have driven off the moment she got out. Instead, he'd taken her home. Alan stared through the windshield, at the city lights beyond the rain-slicked glass. He didn't believe in fate, but tonight felt like a crack in the armor he'd worn for years. And her name, Murata, it echoed in his mind like a memory he hadn't made yet. 2 days later, Mara was back behind the counter at Café Luna, bouncing a tray of overcooked eggs and burnt toast. She moved on autopilot, her thoughts replaying the ride again and again. It had been surreal, and yet, nothing more had come of it. No calls, no news, just silence. "You good?" her coworker Tamika asked, popping gum as she rang up a customer. Mara blinked. "Yeah, just tired." "Vic, you've been weird since Monday." Mara hesitated. "Do you know who Alan Drake is?" Tamika's eyes lit up. "You mean the tech billionaire with resting murder face? Girl, he disappeared like 2 years ago. What about him?" "I think I accidentally got into his car." Tamika stopped chewing. "Wait, what?" "I thought it was my rideshare. He didn't throw me out, he drove me home." Tamika stared. "You're telling me you hitched a ride with one of the richest men in the world and lived to tell about it?" "I didn't know who he was," Mara muttered, "and it's not like he said anything. He was quiet, intense, but kind of curious." Tima let out a low whistle. "You need to write a book or something. From Café Luna to a Lambo with a legend." He wasn't a Lambo, just a very expensive black car. Tamika winked. "That's page 1, babe." Mara rolled her eyes but couldn't help the smile tugging at her lips. Maybe it really was nothing. A weird story she'd tell years from now when her life was different. If it ever changed. That night, Alan sat in a darkened office tower, a skyline of glass and neon behind him. His assistant hovered near the doorway. "Mr. Drake, you have 3 meetings tomorrow. China deal, legal, and the board wants a status update on the offshore project." He nodded without looking up. "Reschedule the board? Push the others back." She hesitated. Understood. After she left, Alan opened a secure server on his laptop. He clicked through files, figures, forecasts, charity reports, but nothing held his attention. Nothing except the grainy black and white snapshot of a storefront. Café Luna. He'd pulled it from traffic footage the night she stepped into his car. The photo was blurry, the angles poor, but there she was. Mara, leaning on the doorframe of the cafe, talking to an elderly woman with a shawl. Smiling. She hadn't smiled like that in the car. He clicked off the image. For someone who'd spent years running from public attention, from shallow partnerships and hollow conversations, Alan couldn't understand why this moment haunted him. A girl with rain in her hair and kindness in her eyes had sat in his silence without fear. And somehow, that mattered more than every merger he'd ever signed. Back at the cafe, Mara opened her tip envelope and sighed. Not enough. Again. Rent was due, her mom's medication refills were overdue, and the little things, groceries, bus fare, electricity, they stacked like bricks on her back. She glanced at her phone. No missed calls. She slid it into her apron and got back to work. Because fairy tales weren't written for girls like her. But across the city, in a penthouse of glass and steel, Alan Drake stood on a balcony watching the rain fall. And he wasn't so sure about that anymore. Mara hadn't planned on returning to work the next day, with the weight of her mistake still spinning in her chest. The night before, she'd tossed and turned, embarrassed by how she'd mistaken a millionaire's car for her rideshare. But the man, Alan Drake, according to the news her coworker flashed on her cracked phone screen, hadn't thrown her out. He had watched her in silence, unreadable, before driving off into the night. It should have ended there, but it didn't. The cafe smelled like burnt coffee and mop water, and the owner, Glenn, was unusually gruff that morning. Mara tried to keep her head down, bust trays, and serve coffee like always, but the air felt wrong. She caught whispers, sideways glances. She pushed through it until mid-morning, when a customer at table 3 called her over. "Wallet's missing," he snapped, eyes narrowed. Mara blinked. I haven't even served your table yet." Glenn was at her side in seconds. "Let's check the cameras." The footage showed her walking near the booth, but there was no proof she took anything. Still, Glenn's mind was made up. He'd always been looking for an excuse. "You've been late 3 times this week, and now this?" he barked. "You're fired, Mara. I don't need a thief in my cafe." Her cheeks flamed. "I didn't take anything." "Tell it to someone who cares," Glenn said coldly, turning away. Humiliated and holding back tears, Mara grabbed her bag and left. She stepped out into the hard sun, her breath catching in her throat. Rent was due in 2 days. Her brother Leo's medication needed refilling by Friday. And now, nothing, just nothing. She didn't see the black sedan until it pulled up silently beside her. The window rolled down, revealing the sharp cheekbones and cold gaze she'd tried not to remember. Alan Drake. He didn't greet her, didn't smile. He simply said, "Get in." Mara's first instinct was to run, but something in his tone wasn't demanding. It was curious. "Don't need saving," she said, standing her ground. "You don't look like someone who needs saving," he replied. "You look like someone who needs a job." That silenced her. "I have a temporary position at my firm," he continued. "Executive assistant. 1 month. Good pay." Mara narrowed her eyes. "Why me?" His eyes lingered on hers. "Because you weren't afraid of me. And I'm intrigued." She should have said no. She should have turned and walked away. But when he handed her a sleek business card and a folder with formal documents, signed and ready, she realized this wasn't a joke. This was real. And she needed the money. The office of Drake Technologies was a glass fortress that made Mara feel like a speck of dust in a snow globe. She stepped off the elevator the next morning in borrowed heels and a blouse from the thrift store, holding the strap of her worn-out tote like armor. Heads turned. Some smirked. Others barely hid their judgment. Alan had given no special introduction, no explanation for her presence. He'd merely told his assistant, "She's with me," and disappeared into a meeting. By lunch, Mara had filed paperwork she didn't understand, spilled half a latte on her keyboard, and endured the pitying glances of well-dressed secretaries. When she finally stepped into the break room, two women stopped talking mid-sentence. One of them, paired, blonde, with a badge that read Nicole, VP Marketing. "She must be some kind of joke," Nicole whispered, not quietly enough. The other woman leaned in. "I heard he brought her in off the street." Nicole's eyes narrowed. "No, he never brings women around. Ever." Mara clenched her jaw and turned away. The burn behind her eyes was sharp, but she refused to cry. Not here. That evening, as she was packing up the mess she'd made of her desk, she heard a soft cough. She turned. Alan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze unreadable. "Survived the first day," she muttered. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You'll adjust, or you won't?" Mara stood, staring at him. "Why are you doing this?" There was a pause, a long one. Then, finally, he said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." She tilted her head. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" He said flatly, "It's not." And just like that, he turned and left. But outside, as Mara was heading for the elevator, she heard it. A voice, a whisper, from one of the assistants by the copier. Just only helping her because she reminds him of someone. Mara paused. And for the first time, she realized, whatever this was, it wasn't just a job. It was a door into a world filled with secrets, silence, and a man who clearly carried more shadows than he let show. And she had just stepped into the middle of it. The next morning began with a chill in the air, and Mara arrived at the office early. She wore the only other decent shirt she owned, a navy button-down missing the top button, and a pair of slacks she'd altered herself. They didn't fit perfectly, but they were clean and pressed. She kept her chin high as she entered, though her stomach twisted. Alan hadn't spoken to her again since that strange comment. "You remind me of someone." It echoed in her mind like a whisper trapped in a hallway. At her desk, Mara found a note in fine penmanship. "Please review the numbers in this file and correct inconsistencies." The file attached was a spreadsheet full of acronyms she didn't recognize. She stared at it for 15 minutes before gathering the courage to knock on Alan's office door. He looked up, seemingly unsurprised to see her. "I don't know what any of this means," she said bluntly. "Then, learn," he replied without looking away from his computer. She stayed rooted to the floor. "I want to, but you hired me out of nowhere and didn't explain anything." Henley looked at her. His gaze wasn't cold this time, just tired. "Why did you get fired from the cafe?" Mara blinked. "You know about that?" "I know more than you think," he said. "Was it true?" Her voice was firm. "They accused me because it was easy. That's what people like that do." His stare lingered on her face for a long moment. Then he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Surprised, Mara did. "I don't bring strangers into this building," Alan began. "But you, when you got into my car and weren't afraid, when you looked at me like I was just a man instead of some tech headline, I remembered something." "Mother," he said quietly. "She died when I was 16. She used to say the kindest people were the ones who had nothing left to prove." Mara didn't know what to say. "He worked double shifts," he continued. "Fell asleep on buses, saved coins in a jar." Mara felt her throat tighten. "You reminded me of her," Alan said. "Not because you're weak, but because you keep going." The air felt suddenly dense, like it held more than just words between them. "Thank you," she said softly, unsure what else could capture what she felt. Alan leaned back in his chair. "You're not just here to do busy work. If you're going to be in this building, you need to understand what we do. Are you willing to learn?" She said without hesitation. "And come back after lunch. I'll walk you through the spreadsheet myself." That afternoon, Alan kept his word. For over an hour, he explained what each column meant, how inventory systems worked, and why quarterly reports looked like gibberish until they didn't. Mara took furious notes, asking questions when she was lost, and though Alan never smiled, he nodded in approval once. At the end of the session, she said, "Why are you really helping me?" Aline didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the floor-to-eight window behind his desk. The city skyline stretched endlessly, lit by the orange glow of late afternoon. "Built walls so tall I forgot what it felt like to see over them," he said. "You didn't flinch when I was cold. You didn't beg when you lost your job, and you didn't play dumb when I gave you real work. That's rare." Mara stepped beside him. "So, this is, what, a test?" He said, "A chance, for both of us." That night, Mara sat on her apartment floor, flipping through her scribbled notes. Leo coughed from the other room. She got up, checked his fever, had gone down, and kissed his forehead. She returned to her room, heart racing. She'd walked into the wrong car, and somehow, into the center of something much bigger than she understood. And yet, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely powerless. The next day, tension in the office reached a quiet crescendo. Mara entered the break room to find Nicole once again holding court, this time whispering louder than usual. She must be sleeping with him. Why else would he give her a job? Mara froze. Another voice responded, lower but biting. "I heard she reminds him of his dead mother." Laughter followed. Mara turned and walked away before they saw her, her hands clenched tightly, but their words stuck like burrs under her skin. Later, as she organized documents on Alan's desk, she asked, without looking up, "Does it bother you what they say about me?" He paused from typing. "Do you care?" He leaned back. "Then I'll handle it." She looked at him. "I don't need protection, I need the truth." His jaw flexed. "The truth is, I don't know what this is yet, but I know I don't want it to end." Mara's chest ached with the weight of that confession. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't sweet, but it was honest. And somehow, that was worth more. Alan stood alone at the top of his glass tower, arms crossed behind his back, staring down at the city below. Rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows like tears he no longer knew how to shed. Behind him, the hum of silence was constant. No footsteps, no voices, just the low buzz of a man who had made himself unreachable. But Mara had changed that. He couldn't explain why her mistake, the wrong car, the wrong man, had lingered in his mind. Maybe it was the quiet way she had muttered apologies, or the way she stared out the window without fear. Most people shrank around him. She didn't, and it haunted him more than it should have. Alan turned from the window and moved to his desk. A silver frame sat in the corner, turned ever so slightly away. He adjusted it. A photo. His mother. She had his eyes and the same serious mouth. The only woman he'd ever trusted completely. Until Camille. His jaw tightened. He remembered the day it all shattered. His engagement to Camille Royce, the daughter of a real estate magnate, a match the tabloids called inevitable. What they didn't report was that Camille never once loved him. She loved what he owned, the companies, the image, the legacy. He had overheard her phone call, not even 24 hours before the wedding. "Safe. Boring. I'll marry him, let the media frenzy pass, then we'll figure it out, me and you." Her voice had been calm, cold, strategic. He hadn't spoken to her again. The wedding was canceled. The press said he'd vanished due to burnout. Only his inner circle knew the truth. Alan Drake had been humiliated by love. He'd buried himself in work, shut down press interviews, attended only critical meetings. For years, he existed in silence. Until Mara. The sound of laughter outside his office made him look up. She was here again. Her voice, though soft, always carried. Alan stepped to the door, cracked it slightly, and saw her handing out papers to the design team, her cheeks pink from rushing. One of the interns smiled at her with genuine warmth. Another leaned close and asked, "How are you holding up?" "Yes," she said, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. Alan closed the door. That night, as the building emptied, Mara lingered behind. Alan had called her in to sort a few files, an excuse to keep her around. She entered quietly, shivering slightly in her thin jacket. "Mr. Drake," she began, "did you need anything else?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he motioned to the corner of the desk. "That photo, what do you think?" Mara stepped forward. "She's beautiful." "He was my mother." Mara tilted her head, studying the woman's features. "She looks like someone who didn't let people mess with her." "She didn't," he said quietly. Then he turned to Mara. "You remind me of her?" That made her pause. Her fingers twitched at her side. "Is that why you offered me this job?" Alan hesitated. "Partly, but not the only reason." Just then, her eyes caught the edge of a newspaper tucked under a pile. She picked it up, slowly. A photo, blurry but clear enough, showed the two of them walking together outside the office. Mara's face paled. "Alan." Unreadable. The headline read, "Drake's Mystery Girl, Assistant or Affair." Her hands trembled. "Is this what people think?" "Try to stop it," Alan said sharply, crossing around the desk. "I never meant for you to become a target." "Target?" Her voice cracked. "I was accused of stealing a wallet last week, fired from the cafe. I've been mocked here, gossiped about, and now this. You're not just helping me, you've made me a story." I didn't have a terrified impulse to confront him often. "I care about how much worse this is getting." Alan watched her storm out. The door shut behind her with a click that felt like a slap. Days passed. He didn't see her, except in brief, fleeting moments. Her head bent, shoulders tight. Then, unexpectedly, he found her on the rooftop garden late one evening, sitting on a bench alone, her face turned to the sky. He approached slowly. "You're not supposed to be up here," she said without looking. "Neither are you." Silence. Alan sat beside her, leaving space. "There's a gala tomorrow night. Our investors are gathering. I want you there." She turned, blinking. "As what? Your date?" He said. "As staff. My staff." Her expression fell. "You want me to serve drinks while they talk about me behind my back. I want them to see you, standing beside me, unshaken." Angela said. Mara laughed bitterly. "You really think that'll change anything?" Daniel stepped beside his wife, and Alan met her eyes. "I think the only thing I regret more than not seeing Camille's truth is failing to show people yours." The gala was held in a ballroom dripping with crystal light. Mara wore a simple black dress from the company wardrobe closet, her hair pulled back, her expression firm. Alan didn't hover, but he never strayed far. Midway through, as Alan greeted investors, one of them leaned in and whispered, "Brave of you, Alan, hiring a lookalike of your mother. Almost poetic." Mara, standing nearby, froze. Before she could react, Alan's voice sliced through the air. "She's not a lookalike. She's a fighter, and you'll speak about her with respect." The room stilled, cameras clicked, whispers spread like wildfire. Alan turned to Mara. "We're leaving." They rushed to the waiting car, paparazzi shouting behind them. Inside the sleek black vehicle, rain thudding against the windows, Alan reached for her hand. She pulled away. "I'm not your ghost," she whispered, "and I won't be your redemption story either." He didn't respond. She stared out the window, unsure if the thudding in her chest was fear, heartbreak, or something else entirely. The car ride was quiet, tension heavy between them. Alan's jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the rain-streaked windshield, but his grip on the steering wheel told Mara more than words could. His knuckles were pale, the veins taut. She shifted in her seat, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. You didn't have to do that, she murmured, still looking out the window. Do what? End me. Make a scene. Now the whole world thinks we're something we're not. Alan's voice came low and rough. I don't care what the world thinks. Mara turned to face him, tired eyes shining. But I do. The car stopped in front of her apartment. For a long second, neither moved. Then Mara reached for the handle. Good night, Mr. Drake. Alan's fingers twitched as if to stop her, but he said nothing. The door closed with a soft thud. The next day, the fallout was immediate. Media outlets ran headlines about Alan Drake's new flame. Photos of Mara at the gala circulated, paired with images of his late mother. The resemblance was undeniable. Rumors flew. Mara kept her head down, but she felt the shift. How coworkers looked at her, how whispers trailed her through every hallway. In the break room, two executives spoke in hushed voices. Did you see the tabloids? She's not even qualified. This is a pity project. Decordant. A ghost with a past. Maybe that's why he keeps her close. Mara backed out quietly before they saw her, heart pounding. She hadn't asked for this. She just needed money for her brother's medication, for rent, for peace. Later that week, Alan summoned her to his office. She walked in with stiff shoulders, already bracing for more damage control. He looked up from his desk. I'm sorry. But that surprised her. I thought putting you at that gala would show them you belong here, he continued. Instead, I exposed you. Mara swallowed. It's not just them. I'm confused too. I don't understand what I am to you. Alan stood, walking to the window like he always did when words got too heavy. Remind me of someone I lost before I ever met her, he said softly. Someone I hoped existed, until you got in my car that night. Mara's breath caught. I see things in you I've only read in books. Courage without applause, kindness without witness. She stepped forward, voice shaking. I'm not a fantasy, Alan. I get angry, I cry. I lie awake at night, wondering how I'm going to keep my brother alive. I'm real. He turned, eyes piercing. That's exactly why I can't look away. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Mara nodded slowly. Do you ask for honesty? Here's mine. I like working here. I'm grateful. But if you don't figure out what you want from me, beyond nostalgia, I'm walking. She turned to leave, pausing just before the door. I'm not your mother, and I'm definitely not Camille, so don't compare me to either. The door closed behind her with a confidence she didn't yet feel. The next morning, Mara entered the office to find chaos. Phones ringing off the hook, assistants scrambling, HR managers pacing. A viral post had spread overnight. A former employee of Drake Corp posted a cropped photo of Alan and Mara at the gala with the caption, "Funny how history repeats itself. Watch this space." Comment sections exploded with speculation. Anonymous users claimed Mara was part of a PR strategy, that Alan was using her to regain public sympathy. Some even called her a plant, an actress hired to soften his image. By noon, her inbox was flooded with hate mail. Mara sat in the bathroom stall, phone shaking in her hands, trying not to cry. When she returned to her desk, her manager handed her an envelope. HR had called her. Before she could go, Alan stormed onto the floor. Everyone froze. He looked around, then saw Mara standing with the envelope. He said, voice sharp. Mr. Drake, her manager began. She's not going anywhere. He turned to the room. Every rumor you've read is a lie. Mara isn't a PR stunt. She's not my girlfriend or a project. She's someone I trust more than most of you. Whispers echoed through the office. Alan looked straight at Mara. I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. She stared at him, breath stuck in her throat. That evening, Mara found herself standing in front of his office again. The sky was bruised with dusk. Her hand hovered above the door before she knocked softly and entered. Alan looked up. You shouldn't have had to see any of that. I've seen worse, she said, voice even. But thank you. He motioned to the seat. Please. She sat, legs crossed, hands folded. What they said. Now, she said, not speeches, just truth. Why me? Alan's voice cracked, just barely. Because when you sat in that car, you didn't know who I was. And when you found out, you didn't run. You demanded better. It's not love, she... No, he said quietly. It's trust, and I don't give it easily. Mara leaned forward. So, what now? Alan took a breath. You keep working here, but not under anyone else. Report directly to me. No more whispers, no more shadows. Wait, he said. As long as it takes. You don't owe me anything. Mara studied him for a long time, then stood. I need time, she whispered. Alan nodded. Take all you need. She walked out, heart heavy, but lighter than it had been in weeks. That night, Alan stood at the rooftop garden again, alone under the stars. In his hand, the photo of his mother, and a fresh one, Mara at the gala, caught mid-loft. He looked up at the sky and whispered, not a ghost, not a mistake. She's the beginning of something I never thought I deserved. And for the first time in years, he smiled. The countryside was quieter than Mara expected. As Alan's sleek car pulled into the gravel driveway of the estate, she leaned forward slightly, peering through the window. The house was large but not ostentatious, walls aged by time, ivy climbing its sides, and an arched wooden door that looked like it hadn't been changed in decades. It was beautiful in a way that whispered rather than shouted. Welcome to Briar Hollow, Alan said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them the entire drive. Your mother lived here, Mara asked, stepping out into the chilled wind that swept across the trees. He nodded once, until the cancer took her. After that, I never came back. Mara hesitated, watching him closely. The man beside her now was different from the cold, clipped CEO she had first mistaken for a rideshare driver. His shoulders were tense, but not with arrogance. With memory. Inside, the home felt frozen in time. Soft lace curtains, framed photographs lining the mantel, a smell of lavender and old books still clung to the air, like the ghost of someone who refused to leave. She loved fresh bread, Alan murmured, trailing his fingers over the edge of a weathered dining table. Used to bake on Sundays. I hated the crusts, and she'd always cut them off for me. Silly, right? Mara said softly. It's not silly, it's love. He looked at her, then away. I brought you here because I needed you to see where I came from, not just what I've become. The storm rolled in without warning. It began with a low rumble in the distance, barely louder than a whisper, but by the time dusk settled over the hills, the sky cracked open with rain. Thunder roared and the wind howled through the trees. The power flickered once, then died entirely. Mara lit a few old candles she found in a drawer near the fireplace, while Alan stoked logs from a basket onto the hearth. Warmth bloomed, and shadows danced against the walls. Looks like we're stranded here tonight, Alan said, brushing dust from his sleeves as he straightened. No power, no signal, and the roads are already flooding. Mara wrapped a knit blanket around her shoulders and sat cross-legged on the old couch. You say that like it's a bad thing. Alan raised an eyebrow. You're not afraid of being stuck here with a man you barely trust. She met his eyes. I'm not afraid of storms. I've lived through worse. For the first time, a real smile touched his lips. They cooked dinner together, little they could with no power. Pasta boiled over the gas stove, canned sauce, a loaf of bread that wasn't quite fresh but toasted well enough over the fire. They shared it with quiet conversation, the storm outside occasionally interrupting with loud cracks of thunder. After they cleaned up, Mara wandered into the hallway and paused by a small door near the back. What's this? Alan hesitated. My mother's study. She reached for the handle, but he was already beside her, gently guiding her hand away. Let me show you. The room was filled with dust and stillness. Papers, photographs, and a half-filled journal sat untouched on a wide oak desk. On the wall, a frame housed a letter in delicate handwriting. Alan stepped closer. She wrote that, the day she found out she was terminal. She said she didn't regret her life, only the things she never said. Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. What did you wish she'd said to you? Alan stared at the letter for a long moment. Then, slowly, he opened a drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. I wrote her back after she passed. I never sent it, obviously, but I never threw it away either. He handed it to Mara. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, feeling the weight of something sacred. She read the first line aloud. Dear Mom, I don't know how to be a man without your voice. Alan turned away. His shoulders were tight and his hands were clenched into fists. I felt like I'd failed her, he said. Every relationship I had after she died, I ruined it. Including the one that almost became a marriage. I don't trust people anymore. I don't trust myself. Mara's throat tightened. Then why bring me here? Because, he said, voice low, you don't treat me like a title. You don't look at my money, you look at me, and I don't know how to handle that. The candlelight flickered again, and she could feel the storm's rage outside, echoing the quiet ache inside the room. She stepped closer. You're allowed to feel broken, but you don't have to hide it from me. He looked at her, and something fragile cracked open behind his eyes. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. Mara tilted her head into his hand. His breath caught. And then, finally, he leaned down, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft, slow, and filled with every word they hadn't said. But just as quickly, he pulled away. I can't, Alan whispered, stepping back. I'm sorry. Mara stood still, the air between them colder than before. Pearson have come, she whispered, blinking away the tears that threatened to spill. I shouldn't have fallen for a man who's still broken. She turned and disappeared down the hall. Behind her, Alan stood frozen by the fire, the letter still in his hand. Mara sat curled up on the edge of the guest bed, knees tucked to her chest, the blanket pulled tightly around her like armor. The storm outside had quieted, but inside her, the wind still howled. She had no idea what she had expected tonight. Perhaps a moment of clarity, of connection, but instead she felt like a child reaching for sunlight only to find more shadow. A knock sounded on the door. She didn't answer. Alan's voice came gently through the wood. I know I hurt you. Still, she said nothing. Because I didn't pull away because I didn't feel anything. I pulled away because I felt too much. The words floated in the air. Vulnerable. Real. Mara stared at the candle flickering on the nightstand, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Finally, she opened the door. Alan stood there, barefoot, hair disheveled, holding the same letter he had shared earlier. He looked nothing like the CEO the world knew. He looked like a man who had been trying to hold his world together with shaking hands. I'm not good at this, he said, but I don't want you to go to bed thinking you weren't enough. I wasn't looking for enough, Mara replied. I was looking for honesty, for something that wasn't built on fear. I'm afraid all the time, he said, stepping into the room slowly. Afraid of wanting someone too much, of needing them, of not knowing who I am without my walls. I'm afraid of being someone's second choice, she said, of being a placeholder for a memory you haven't let go. Alan sat on the edge of the bed, the silence between them now soft instead of sharp. Be experienced. She didn't love me, he said quietly. She loved the illusion, the power. But with you, you saw me before you even knew my name, before I knew yours. That terrifies me more than anything. Mara's eyes glistened. I don't want to be your escape from loneliness, Alan. I want to be something real. He nodded, swallowing hard. So do I. She studied him. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of the letter, his eyes darting away from hers when the emotions got too thick. This man, the same one who ruled boardrooms and terrified executives, was sitting in front of her, unsure, exposed. And in that vulnerability, she saw something more valuable than any empire he had built. She reached out, placing her hand over his. Read the rest of your letter, she said. The part where you wrote, I don't know how to believe I'm worth loving if I don't wear the armor. He closed his eyes. "I want you to know," she continued, "I see the man under the armor, and I don't need perfect. I just need you to stop running." His shoulders sank, like a great weight had finally loosened its grip. "Then stay, just stay." She leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against his. "Only if you promise not to hide from me anymore." "I promise." They sat that way for a while, the storm finally retreating into memory. Then Mara stood and walked toward the old bookshelf, pulling down a photo album covered in dust. "You never showed me pictures of her," she said, flipping it open. Alan moved beside her, pointing at a picture. "That's her on her graduation day. She wanted to be a teacher, ended up being the CEO of my heart instead." Mara smiled. She looked kind, the way she held your hand in every photo. "Was always holding me together. And several times she still is," Mara said softly. They spent hours flipping through the album, sipping tea made over the fireplace, trading stories from childhood to career chaos. The closeness returned, not through passion, but through presence. Through truth. Later that night, as the fire dimmed and sleep began to blur the edges of their vision, Mara walked to the window and watched the moonlight pierce through the thinning clouds. "Proud of you," she said. Alan came up behind her, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "I hope so. I've spent years chasing success, but maybe I missed the point." She turned toward him. "Then let's start finding it," she whispered. This time, when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or restrained. It was gentle, honest, and whole. A kiss not of promises, but of presence. When they parted, Mara laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of a heart that, for the first time, had stopped running. "You're not your legacy," she murmured. He nodded. "And you're not my replacement." "I'm the storm," she whispered. "I'm the storm that stayed." They fell asleep side by side on the old living room couch, wrapped in the warmth of something unspoken but deeply felt. No masks, no riches, just two people who had finally stopped hiding. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside, something beautiful had begun. Monday morning arrived not with sunlight, but with storm clouds far darker than anything nature could conjure. The moment Alan stepped out of the elevator into the sleek marble lobby of Drake Innovations, his assistant met him with a pale face and a trembling phone. "You need to see this," she whispered, thrusting the device into his hands. The screen lit up with a photo, grainy, zoomed in, but unmistakable. Alan and Mara, standing close on the porch of his countryside retreat, her hair wind-blown, his hand near her back. Another shot showed them through a rain-flecked window, Mara laughing at something, Alan gazing at her like the world had narrowed to her face alone. The caption below read, "Billionaire's secret romance? CEO Alan Drake caught cozying up to cafe worker." Alan barely had time to process before the questions began. Fast, loud, vicious. "Is she your girlfriend? Was she hired to play a role? Are you dating your employee?" Died. By the time he reached his office, the images had spread like wildfire. News anchors debated her intentions, social media boiled with hashtags like Gold Diggergate and Drake Affair, and in the boardroom, the vultures were circling. Alan stood in front of the glass table, watching the board members as they argued among themselves. "This compromises our upcoming merger with Axis Tech. We cannot have investors questioning your judgment, Alan. Have you vetted her background? Is she even who she says she is?" Alan clenched his jaw. "She has nothing to do with the company's business. This is personal." A tall, sharp-sighted woman on the board leaned forward, voice cold as steel. "When your personal life threatens shareholder trust, it stops being personal." He looked away, jaw tight. He wanted to defend Mara, to shout the truth, that she wasn't chasing money or fame, that she didn't even want to be near this spotlight, but the weight of it all pressed in. He had built this company with silence and calculation, and now his silence might be the only thing that could shield her. Later that evening, Mara sat quietly in the corner of her dim apartment, scrolling through the same headlines. Her photo was everywhere, some cropped to make her look seductive, others framed to make her look desperate. People had taken photos from her old social media accounts. They mocked her clothes, speculated about her motives, and dredged up anything they could find. She had called Alan once. He hadn't answered. When he finally did come, it wasn't the man who held her under the stormy candlelight. It was the man in the polished suit, guarded and cold. "I need you to lay low for a while," he said softly. She stared at him, stunned. "Lay low? Until this passes. The bored investors, they're watching." Her heart cracked, slow and cruel. "So, I'm a liability now?" "No, it's not like that. It was never yours to hide, Alan." He reached out, but she stepped back. "I believed you when you said you weren't running anymore. I let myself fall for a man who said he was done hiding. But now, you're asking me to disappear." "I'm trying to protect you," she said, tears threatening but unshed. "You're trying to protect yourself from what people might think of you, loving someone like me." He didn't answer, and in that silence her decision formed. She left her badge and resignation on his desk the next day. Mara packed her things in a single worn duffel bag and left without fanfare. No one tried to stop her. In the eyes of most, she was a scandal, a mistake to be forgotten before the quarterly report hit the press. With no income, she fell back on what she had always leaned on when the world turned cold: her hands, her sketches, her quiet resilience. She found odd jobs, cleaning motels, bussing tables in places that didn't care about her past. At night, she filled sketchbooks with faces, expressions, moments. And for the first time, she started selling them. Not through galleries or agencies, but online. Under an alias, using a friend's help to set up an anonymous. Her art spoke more now. Each line a confession, each shadow a wound. She didn't draw pretty things, she drew truth. And always there was one sketch she returned to. She drew him not as the billionaire CEO, but as the man sitting in the candlelight holding a letter to his dead mother. The man who smiled without realizing it. The man who once touched her hand with trembling fingers as if he couldn't believe she was real. She titled it, "Still Hiding." Meanwhile, Alan was unraveling. He canceled meetings, ignored calls. His team scrambled to manage the chaos while he drifted through the motions. He wasn't angry at the media. He was angry at himself for not choosing her in that moment, for letting fear dictate his love. He went to the cafe where she used to work, hoping maybe she'd return. Maybe she'd leave a note. Maybe there would be some trace of her. He sat at her old table, ordered coffee he didn't drink, stared at the chipped paint on the tabletop like it held answers. He watched people pass the window, hoping one of them might be her. He waited, and waited. And then one night, restless and alone, he wandered onto a random art site someone had forwarded him. "You should see this," the message had said. He clicked the link without thought. And there she was, the sketch of him, raw, exposed, quiet. Only. She had seen him, the real him, the man behind the empire. He stared at the image for what felt like hours. And beneath it, the artist's note read, "You can love someone and still not know how to stand beside them." I drew what he couldn't say. Alan closed his laptop slowly. And for the first time in weeks, he picked up his phone with trembling hands and typed her number. He didn't hit send. But he wasn't done trying. Not yet. Mara's apartment was quieter than usual. The hum of the fridge, the distant sound of someone arguing in the hallway, the occasional creak from the ceiling above, all reminders of the life she'd returned to. Familiar, yes, but it no longer fit like it once had. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers, pencils, half-finished sketches, and shipping boxes. The drawing of Alan, still hiding, had sold within an hour. She hadn't named him in the listing. She hadn't needed to. Whoever had bought it knew he was. It unnerved her, but part of her was proud. It was her truth, etched into paper, and it had spoken. Her phone buzzed. A message from a buyer. "Do you have more pieces from this collection?" The emotional detail is stunning. She stared at the screen for a long time, unsure whether she wanted to say yes or never draw again. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then someone knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heartbeat picked up. She walked cautiously to the door, peered through the peephole. It was him. Alan stood in the hallway. No driver, no security, no coat. Soaked from the rain, holding a small wrapped package in his hand like it weighed more than anything he'd carried before. She hesitated and opened the door. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, raindrops dripping from his hair, eyes searching her face as if afraid it would vanish again. Toward the drawing, he finally said. Mara's voice was calm, but her fingers curled tightly at her sides. I didn't think you'd recognize yourself. I didn't at first, he admitted. But then I realized, that's the me I've always been, the one I never let anyone see. She didn't respond. Aline held out the small package. I had this before the retreat. I was going to give it to you that night, but then I ruined everything. Mara took it slowly, unwrapping the brown paper. Inside was a sketchbook, handmade, the pages blank, but on the first one, in clean ink, was a note in his handwriting. The woman who sees through storms. I don't deserve your lines, but I hope someday I earn them. Her hands trembled slightly. Alan took a breath. I don't want to hide anymore. Not from the board, not from the press, not from you. She looked up, voice quiet. And what do you want from me? He stepped closer, carefully. I want to sit at your table and drink the worst coffee of my life, if that's where you are. I want to show up not when the cameras are off, but when they're watching, and still choose you. She blinked fast, trying to hold back everything breaking loose inside her. You didn't choose me, she said. When it mattered most, you asked me to disappear. I was scared. Was I? No, he whispered. And you were braver than me. She looked down at the sketchbook again, then back at him. Why now? Because the moment I saw your drawing, I knew I'd already lost everything else. But if I still had the chance to say I was wrong, if I could look at you and say that you are not a mistake or a secret or a scandal, you're the only part of my life that ever made sense. The hallway felt narrower suddenly. The light from the single flickering bulb above them shimmered off the water on his jacket, casting strange shadows on the floor. Mara spoke slowly. I'm not your redemption arc, Alan. I'm not here to make you whole. He said, but maybe we could make something new, not out of what I was, but what we are now. Silence settled between them again. Heavy, but not hostile. Mara opened the sketchbook, flipping to the next blank page. She took a pencil from her nearby table, walked toward him, and handed it to him. Draw something. He blinked. What? If you want to build something real, start by putting yourself on the page. Alan looked down at the pencil, then back at her. I haven't drawn since I was a kid. Good, she said. That means it might actually be honest. He cracked a breathless smile, then stepped into her apartment for the first time since she'd walked away from his world. Over the following days, the media slowly shifted. Alan issued a statement, not from a podium, but as a personal essay, published in a tech journal and reprinted in dozens of outlets. He didn't deny the photos. He didn't spin the story. He wrote about vulnerability, about power, about the way people treat those without titles and bank accounts. He admitted that he'd failed someone who had shown him only kindness and clarity. He mentioned her name once, not as a prop, as the person who showed him who he really was. And in the closing line, he wrote, "The only scandal worth surviving is the one where you nearly lose the one person who made you want to be seen again." It was shared, debated, praised, and mocked. Mara read it only once, then closed the article, picked up a fresh piece of paper, and drew the first sketch of her new collection. This one wasn't Alan. It was her. Strong, tired, unapologetic. And behind her, barely visible, as if still learning how to belong, was a shadow with eyes that finally looked open. The community hall smelled faintly of turpentine and old wood. Mara stood near the far wall, adjusting a crooked frame on a display titled, "Mistaken Identity." Her hands trembled, just slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of what each sketch revealed. Each piece told its own quiet truth. Her truth. The first drawing showed the backseat of a car, rain on the windows, and a startled girl climbing in, her own wide eyes frozen in graphite. The second captured a towering man in profile, his jaw clenched, his distant, the faint reflection of a woman in his luxury car's tinted window. A mistake, a beginning. Mara stepped back, scanning the lineup she had created. She had tried to be honest in her art, brutally so. The tenderness she refused to speak out loud, the fury she never unleashed, the ache of wanting something that wasn't hers. Behind her, the small exhibition room buzzed quietly. Locals strolled through in patchy jackets and Sunday best dresses. A few whispered kind words. Some paused longer in front of a drawing titled Stormlight, where two silhouettes sat by a candle in the center of a dark room, a moment she'd carried alone until now. She hadn't expected him to come. And yet, he was there. Alan stood near the back wall, his hands buried in the pockets of his gray coat, a wool scarf wrapped carefully around his neck. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on her. He didn't move forward, didn't call her name. He just stood, the way he had so many times before. Mira's breath caught. She turned quickly, pretending not to see, stepping toward her small stand where prints were being sold for donations to a local children's center. Her fingers fumbled with the coin box. She couldn't do this, not again. But just as she reached for her thermos of lukewarm tea, someone brushed past her shoulder. It wasn't Alan, it was a child, one of the students from the art program she volunteered for. The girl pointed to the sketch titled, "The Bench He Waited On," and asked, "Is this the sad man you always talk about in class?" Mara smiled weakly, nodding. Behind her, the door opened. When she turned around again, Alan was gone. In his place, on the small wooden stool where visitors left guestbook messages, sat a crisp cream envelope with her name on it. Mara handwritten in dark ink. Her heart thundered as she picked it up. The weight of it alone told her it wasn't just a line or two. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as the first words came into view. "Dear myself, in your sketches," and for the first time, I didn't feel like a stranger to myself anymore. She sank onto the folding chair behind the donation stand. I spent years hiding behind boardrooms, press releases, and security gates. I told myself it was strength. That detachment kept me powerful. But it wasn't power, it was fear. I feared being seen for who I truly am, a man shaped by betrayal, afraid to be needed, terrified to need. First time you looked at me, in the car, I wasn't Alan Drake, the CEO. I was just a man without direction. And somehow, you didn't flinch. You didn't flatter or run. You just offered warmth. And that did something I wasn't prepared for. Tears blurred the ink. I should have told you then. I should have told you everything. But I was still a coward who thought kindness came with conditions. I watched you lose your job, your peace, your dignity because of me, and I still asked you to stay quiet. I'm sorry, Mara, not just for the silence, but for making you feel like a chapter in my story, instead of realizing I was a page in yours. By the time she reached the final lines, her chest ached. I'm leaving the city for a while. The sabbatical was overdue. If I never see you again, I needed you to know this. You were never a mistake. You were the moment I started becoming someone I could actually like. Thank you for mistaking me, for seeing me, for challenging me to change. The chair beneath her felt like it would collapse under the weight of it all. From across the room, her younger brother Matteo, healthy now thanks to the medication she'd worked so hard to afford, approached with a frown. "You okay?" he asked. Mara folded the letter, pressing it to her heart. "Letter," she whispered. "From him?" She nodded. Matteo looked toward the door. "So, what are you going to do?" Mara stood. The pain, the chaos, the misunderstanding. It all still swirled inside her, but something new had bloomed too. Truth. And with it, clarity. I'm going to stop him from disappearing again." And without another word, she grabbed her coat and sprinted into the dusk. Outside, the air was crisp. She called for a rideshare, barely waiting for it to arrive. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and checked the time. If his flight was leaving in the next hour, she might still catch him. "Please, just let me get there." She arrived at the towering Drake Tech building as the sun dipped below the skyline. Security tried to stop her in the marble lobby, but the sight of the letter, his name in that unmistakable scrawl, softened their tone. "She's just about to leave," one guard said. "Elevator still on the ground floor." She dashed for it. As the doors began to slide shut, she reached forward and slammed her hand between the gap. It halted, opened again. Alan stood inside, suitcase in hand, eyes wide. Mara stepped inside, chest heaving. "I got your letter," she whispered, "and I'm not going to miss you twice." Alan didn't speak at first. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime, sealing them inside a mirrored box of fluorescent light and suspended breath. Mara clutched the letter in her hand like it was a lifeline. Alan looked at her like she wasn't real. "I thought you wouldn't come," he finally said. I almost didn't," she replied, voice quiet but firm. "But then I read your words, and I realized I've been waiting to hear them since the day I got into your car." Alan exhaled, the weight in his shoulders falling lower with each second. "I meant every word. Every damn one." "I know," she said. Silence stretched between them, the elevator barely moving. Mara turned toward him fully. "You hid behind suits and walls and silence. But I never asked for the perfect version of you, Alan. I never needed your name or your empire. I just wanted the man who looked at me like I wasn't invisible." His throat bobbed. "I looked at you like that because you were the first person who didn't expect anything from me. Not a quote, not a product, not a payout." She stepped closer. "And you still think that's not worth staying for?" The elevator dinged as it reached the rooftop access level. Alan hesitated before pressing the emergency stop. The hum of machinery died, and suddenly the stillness was sacred. "You deserve more than a man running from everything," he said. "But I didn't know how to stop running until you." Mara's eyes welled. "Then don't run now." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a smaller, letter-creased, older, worn at the corners. "I wasn't planning to give this to anyone," he said, handing it to her. "It's the letter I never sent to my mother." Mara took it with both hands. The envelope trembled as she opened it, and her breath caught as she read the words inside. "Bah. I built towers so no one could see how hollow I was. I chased ambition because love felt unsafe. I kept thinking I'd earn peace when I had enough power. But I'm lonelier now than I ever was in the small apartment where we used to dream. I miss you. I miss your voice telling me that it's okay to be soft sometime. I'm still trying to believe that, Alan." When she finished, she looked up to find Alan watching her with unguarded vulnerability. "You're soft," she whispered. "You just never believed anyone could love you for it." He reached out, and this time she didn't pull away. They stood there, hands joined, the distance between them finally closing. "I'm not going to the airport," he said softly. "Good," Mara replied, blinking away tears, "because I don't want to meet you in another goodbye." Alan smiled, a real one this time. "You still smell like oil paint." She laughed through her tears. "You still talk like a man who hasn't touched the real world in years." They stepped out of the elevator together, the rooftop bathed in the gold blush of twilight. The city stretched out before them, glittering and unaware of the small miracle taking place above it. Alan pulled off his coat and placed it around Mara's shoulders. "Cold?" "Terrified," she admitted, pressing the letter to her chest. "But less so when I'm near you." He took her hand again. "Then let's be terrified together." They didn't say, "I love you." Not yet. Some truths didn't need immediate ceremony. Some needed silence, breath, and shared space. The next morning, Mara woke in her own bed, her brother still snoring on the couch in the other room. The envelope lay beside her pillow, but the fear that had once lived in her chest had quieted. Later that week, a delivery arrived, a canvas set, new brushes, and a handwritten card. Every masterpiece begins with a mistake. Thanks for mistaking me. But that wasn't the real gift. The real gift came days later, when Mara stepped into her art class for underprivileged youth, and Alan stood waiting at the back of the room. Not in a suit, not as a CEO. Just as Alan. He picked up a brush, sat on the floor with the kids and said, "Teach me." Mara didn't answer. She just smiled, picked up an extra canvas, and sat beside him. The gallery exhibit would stay open for another month. Her inbox overflowed with interest from patrons, journalists, and one prestigious museum offering a residency. But she didn't need fame. She just needed peace, and maybe, if the world allowed, a future that started not at the top of a building, but right there on the floor, with color and light and two people learning how to begin again. A few weeks later, she pinned his letter beside her easel, not for the world to see, but for her. A reminder that some stories begin in mistakes, bloom through silence, and survive only when someone is brave enough to say, "I'm not going to miss you twice." Alan stood on the edge of his rooftop garden, overlooking the glittering skyline that once felt like a prison of glass and steel. Tonight it shimmered differently, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The city hadn't changed, but he had. In his hand he held a single folded sketch, its edges worn from the hours he'd spent perfecting it. It was the first drawing he'd made in years, a recreation of that night she'd missed, her hair dripping rain, her fingers trembling, and her laughter like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Behind him, the elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. Mara stepped out slowly, her heels clicking on the stone tiles. She wore a cream-colored dress that floated around her like morning mist, simple and unembellished. Yet to Alan, she was more radiant than any jewel, more breathtaking than any gallery piece. He turned to face her, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You got into my car like it was your ride," he said, the corners of his lips lifting. "I didn't know then that you were driving me somewhere too." Mara's eyes welled as she stepped closer, hands clasped in front of her chest. "Where did I take you, Alan?" He unfolded the sketch and handed it to her. It was the two of them inside the car that night, her caught mid-apology, him glancing over, startled, annoyed, and captivated. "You took me to a place where mistakes don't mean the end, where starting over doesn't mean starting alone." Tears traced down her cheeks as she laughed gently, voice trembling. "That's the worst proposal line I've ever heard." He grinned, taking her hand. "Not done yet." Alan dropped to one knee, not with a ring, but with the open sketch between them. The wind picked up, catching strands of Mara's hair, but she didn't move. Her world had narrowed to this man, this moment, this rooftop suspended between memory and promise. "I want this life to be ours," he said softly. "The wrong turns, the misunderstandings, the silences, all of it. I want your courage to challenge me, your honesty to soften me, your chaos to keep me human. I don't have a diamond, but I have every broken piece of me stitched back together by you." Mara crouched beside him, her forehead resting against his. "You were never the car, Alan," she whispered. "You were always the destination." They didn't hear the gentle applause from the few friends and family gathered near the rooftop's edge. Her brother stood, smiling, arms slung over his girlfriend's shoulders. Alan's godmother, elegant and sharp-eyed, dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. There was no orchestra, no cameras, no social media posts. Only a rooftop, a city, and two hearts stripped bare. The ceremony was quiet. Vows were spoken, not like speeches, but like secrets shared in moonlight. Mara promised never to let fear write her endings. Alan promised never to let silence become his shield again. As they exchanged rings, thin silver bands engraved with the date of their first mistaken ride, the sky darkened. And then, as if on cue, rain began to fall. Soft, cool, cleansing. Mara tilted her head back, laughing as droplets danced on her cheeks. Alan's suit soaked quickly, but he didn't care. He pulled her close, arms wrapping around her waist, and they swayed together as their guests cleared space around them. Their first dance wasn't rehearsed. It didn't need to be. It was like everything between them had always been. Her head on his shoulder, his lips near her ear. "I love you, Mara," he murmured. She smiled through tears. "I know, even when you didn't." The rain fell harder, but no one ran for cover. Under the open sky, Mara and Alan danced slowly, oblivious to the wet fabric clinging to their skin, to the umbrellas being opened around them. Her brother watched with a hand over his heart. Alan's godmother leaned close to the officiant and whispered, "That boy finally found his—" Mara looked up at Alan as the music softened, their foreheads pressed together under the clouds. "I used to think love was something I wasn't allowed to reach for," she said. "Like a store window I could look through but never step inside." Alan shook his head gently. "It wasn't you who wasn't allowed. It was the world that tried to convince you you weren't enough." She let out a breath, shaky but sure. "Then this," pointed at his life with you, "it's proof I am." They pulled apart slowly, only to be pulled into hugs and kisses from the few gathered guests. Her brother handed her a bouquet of wildflowers. "You didn't need roses," he said. "You just needed truth." Alan's godmother handed him a box wrapped in faded blue paper. "It was your mother's," she said softly. "She wrote a letter the night before she passed. She wanted you to have it when you found someone worth breaking for." Alan took it slowly, hands trembling. He didn't open it right away. He tucked it into his coat pocket and instead reached for Mara's hand. "Come with me," he said. They stepped away from the crowd and into the small rooftop greenhouse he'd built years ago and never used. Vines curled along the glass walls. The air smelled of damp soil and old hope. He led her to the far wall where an unfinished wooden bench stood against the window. With a pocket knife, he carved into it slowly. A plus M. "I never carved anything before," he said, voice low, "but this felt right." Mara sat him and touched the letters. "It's the only thing that matters." They stayed there long after the guests had left, after the music had faded, after the city lights flickered on below them like stars finding their rhythm. Ainley took out the letter. Mara didn't read over his shoulder. She waited, watching him as his eyes scanned the pages, a tear falling silently down his cheek. "She wrote," he whispered, "you'll know her not by what she gives you, but by what she sees in you when you offer her nothing." He folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. She knew. Mara leaned in and kissed his cheek, and so did I. They sat there until morning, fingers laced, shoes kicked off, hearts still. The bench bore their initials, the sky bore witness, and the world, finally, made room for a love that wasn't perfect, but was holy, deeply real. As dawn broke, Alan stood and helped Mara up. "Ready to start the rest?" Mara smiled. "Only if you're not driving this time." Alan laughed, pulling her close. "No, we drive together, always." And with hands clasped and hearts aligned, they stepped into the light, two souls who had mistaken each other once, but would never again. The old brick building had once been an abandoned post office, forgotten on the edge of downtown. Now, its faded red walls carried a new sign, hand-painted in Mara's signature brushstrokes, "The Right Ride Foundation." Underneath, in smaller letters, it read, "Every journey begins with the courage to get in the car." Outside, the halls echoed with voices, young, full of questions, laughter, and possibility. Mara walked through the newly finished East Wing, carrying a crate of drawing pads under one arm and a bundle of charcoal pencils in the other. The art room smelled of fresh paint and clay, and light streamed in through oversized windows Alan had insisted on installing. Across the building, Alan stood at a podium in the community hall, his tie slightly askew, sleeves rolled up. He was speaking to a group of teenagers from local schools, most of whom had never stepped into a corporate office, much less spoken to someone like him. "What I didn't realize," Alan said, his voice steady, "was that success means nothing if you can't tell the truth when you look in the mirror. Leadership doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts when you ask for directions after you're lost." The students clapped. A few teachers exchanged quiet glances. When the session ended, Alan stepped away and saw Mara through the glass, sitting on the art room floor with 3 children showing her their sketches. One girl had drawn a stick figure holding an umbrella over another. Mara's eyes lit up. Alan lingered in the hallway, watching her. Even after all this time, He still didn't know how to walk away from the sight of her. Later that afternoon, the two of them met on the rooftop garden of the building. Alan watered the rosemary while Mara flipped through a student's portfolio. "You were great with them," she said softly, not looking up. "I sounded like a retired preacher," Alan replied, laughing. "But they listened." She smiled. "Because you were honest." Alan turned to her, brushing soil off his hands. "I was never honest with myself until I met you." She closed the sketchbook. "And now, you're helping kids believe they can be more than their neighborhood or their mistakes." He came closer. "And you're showing them that art matters, that expression is survival." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the city far below them. That evening, Mara unlocked a cabinet in her home studio. Inside were pieces she hadn't shown the public, a new series, one that had been quietly forming in her heart. The first was called The Stranger's Shadow, a grayscale depiction of a woman entering a car, her outline uncertain, as if caught between trust and fear. The second was titled More Than His Suit. Alan without his usual armor, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, sitting on a stoop with a little boy leaning on his shoulder. Bulk pieces would be entered into the spring showcase at the downtown gallery, but only under her middle name, Elise. She didn't want the fame, just the feeling. One morning, as they sipped tea together in their kitchen, Mara looked up from her cup. "I want to take the art program outside the foundation, to libraries, shelters, schools that can't come to us." Alan nodded. "We'll start with a mobile studio. I'll get you the permits, the van, and you get me your curriculum." She grinned. "Deal." It was in moments like this, quiet, collaborative, real, that their love was strongest. Weeks passed. The mobile art van took shape. Alan hired a mechanic who had once been incarcerated for petty theft, but now trained young apprentices in trade skills. Mara hand-painted the sides of the van with a mural, a city skyline, a rain-soaked street, and a car glowing with warmth in the storm. On the back, just above the license plate, she wrote in bold letters, "The ride that changed everything." One day, as they walked past the cafe where it all began, Alan stopped. "You want to go in?" he asked. She looked up, amused. "You ordering for both of us this time?" He laughed, pushing open the door. "Tea, for both of us." They took the same corner seat, the one where Mara used to wait for customers, wiping down sticky menus and pretending not to be exhausted. Now, she leaned into Alan's shoulder, watching their daughter through the window as she chased pigeons in the square. Where he worked. Essentially looked at it like it was a contrary. "Why were these?" "I just got into your car." Alan chuckled. "Every day." She looked at him. "But I'm glad I did." He nodded, taking her hand. "So am I." Moments later, Lila ran in, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Miles was saved and alive. "Daddy, look what I drew." She held it up. It was a car recognizably Alan's old sedan, but inside, instead of two figures, there were three. A little girl in the back seat, grinning. Mara's eyes filled. Alan swallowed. "We have a future, Ryder," he whispered. "I think she already knows the way," Mara replied. That night, after putting Lila to bed, Mara sat in her home studio. A soft rain tapped against the window, a familiar rhythm that always took her back. To the night she stepped into a stranger's car thinking it was her ride, to the man who didn't push her out but instead drove her home in silence. Now, that same man was in the kitchen, humming off-key while washing dishes, and their daughter's sketch lay pinned above her desk, right next to the original napkin sketch Alan had drawn for their wedding, the one of her stepping into the wrong car. She picked up a pen and opened a blank page in her journal, but this wasn't for her. It was a letter. "Dear Lila," she began, her handwriting neat and full of care. "I don't know when you'll read this. Maybe when you're 15 and angry at the world. Maybe when you're lost and looking for something real. Or maybe when you step into the wrong place and wonder if it could ever be right." She paused, breathing in deeply, then continued. "You weren't born of wealth or luxury. You were born of a moment, one that looked like a mistake to everyone else, but turned into a miracle for us. Outside, Alan joined her, drying his hands with a towel. "You writing?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. She nodded. To her, he didn't speak. He just kissed the top of her head and sat across from her, watching the candlelight flicker between them. Her words hit a note, her voice sounding strong and true. That love isn't perfect, that it can come wrapped in silence and storms and second chances, that sometimes a broken man is still a whole father. Alan's jaw tightened, eyes glinting. She'll know, because she'll see it every day. Weeks later, the foundation held its first citywide event, a partnership with the Department of Education and a local youth mentorship program. The Right Ride provided free transportation for underprivileged students to attend summer programs, mentorship sessions, and therapy workshops. Mara was swarmed with children who ran to her art tables with bright eyes and open hands. She moved among them like she belonged to the world of crayons and hope. Alan stood near the edge of the crowd, watching her laugh with the students, handing out ribbons and hugs. A reporter approached him, notepad ready. "Mr. Drake," she said, "what inspired this initiative?" He looked over at Mara, then at Lila playing tag with a group of other children nearby. "Woman," he answered simply, "one who mistook me for a ride but turned out to be my destination." That quote would run in the city paper the next day, and when Mara saw it clipped and pinned to the studio corkboard, she smiled, not because it was romantic, but because it was true. Months passed. Alan released a new tech platform, an educational access app designed for underserved students. He named it MaraNet. At the Global Tech Summit in Dubai, standing before thousands, Alan ended his keynote with a tribute. "I used to believe that data would change the world, but then I met a woman who proved that $1, a car ride, and a little faith could do the same." The applause lasted over a minute, but what Alan remembered most was seeing Mara's tearful face on the live stream back home. Lila bouncing on her lap, whispering, "Daddy's talking about you." The night he returned from the summit, Alan opened the front door to find their living room covered in hand-drawn banners. "Welcome back, Dad, we're proud of you," and "Art and Code Save the World" in glittery letters. Mara hugged him tight. No words, just heartbeats. Later, in the garden behind their home, they sat on the wooden bench Alan had carved with their initials, M and A. Mara leaned into his side. "You remember the bus stop?" He laughed. "I'll never forget it. You didn't ask me for anything, not even my name." Worried that Wendy was too busy wondering why I didn't want you to get out. They were quiet for a moment. Then Mara pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I finished the letter," she said. She nodded. "Want to hear it?" Alan adjusted slightly, one arm around her as she unfolded the page and began to read aloud. "Dear Lila," she began, again, this time in a voice thick with emotion. "There will be days when the world seems too loud, too cruel, too broken. But remember this, your story didn't begin in a mansion or a miracle. It began with a mistake. A ride I shouldn't have taken, a man too guarded to love, and $1 I gave without expecting anything." Ellen's hand tightened around hers. "That mistake became your father, that moment became your family, and you, my darling, became the best thing we never planned." She paused, glancing at Alan, then whispered the final lines. "Never be afraid to get in the wrong car. Sometimes, some of the right life begins." Tears slipped down Alan's cheek, not of sorrow, but of awe. They watched the stars overhead, the same ones that had once seemed distant and unreachable. Now, they felt closer. And from the window upstairs, Lila peeked out, watching her parents with the knowing heart of a child raised in love, not luxury. The garden, the bench, the storm, the silence, the vows, the foundation, all of it built from a single moment of mistaken identity. And from that moment came everything.